So I'd like to introduce our speaker for tonight. Annette has worked on local and national conservation projects as well as wildlife education and rehabilitation programs for over the last 35 years. She joined the grassroots project Chicago Bird Collision Monitors 20 years ago and became its director in 2005, helping to advance its mission to rescue, educate, and advocate for the protection of birds impacted by urban hazards and threats. It's estimated that more than 1 billion migratory birds die in North America each year from collisions with buildings. From residential structures to high-rise buildings, collision deaths are ranked as one of the greatest threats to bird populations after habitat loss. Chicago Bird Collision Monitors is a conservation organization working since 2003 to address these problems that lights and building designs pose to birds that pass through urban areas. Volunteers recover thousands of dead and injured birds from more than 200 different species each fall and spring. The project raises awareness, educates, and advocates for bird safety measures. Annette's presentation tonight will focus on ways that not only CBCM, but all of us can work together to create safer passages for migratory birds. With that, Annette, I will turn it over to you. There we go. All right. There we go.
Yay. Great. Okay, thanks so much for inviting me. It's a busy time of year. As everybody knows, it's spring migration and we're getting busy with a lot of birds that are coming through right now. And being in the Chicago area, we can be saying that we're number one, but unfortunately the thing that we're number one in is posing the greatest threat to migratory birds of any city in the United States. We've been ranked as the location where birds have the greatest chance of being harmed or killed in the United States. It's by virtue of the fact that the amount of artificial nighttime lighting that we have, which attracts birds into the urban area, the fact that millions of birds use this path, and they've used it for thousands of years before we've had buildings here. So the sheer volume of birds that come through here, the amount of light that we attract them with, and then of course all the glass in our urban built environment are a perfect storm that makes Chicago such a dangerous place, such a wonderful place to be to see birds, but also puts many birds in great peril. You can see from the study that was done by Cornell that, yes. Okay, sure. Having trouble hearing. Is this better? That sounds loud. No, I was worried that was too loud. This is better? Yes. Okay, all right. So you can see from this study that was done by Cornell that Chicago ranks number one, and quite a ways below it come Houston, Dallas, Atlanta, and New York. Again, by virtue of the fact of the artificial lighting that we put out that attracts birds, the number of birds, that millions that come through here every spring and fall, and the built environment that we're dealing with. The numbers of birds that are traveling through here, as people understand, migration is one of the most amazing phenomena in nature, with birds traveling hundreds and sometimes thousands of miles, all the way from South America to the northern parts of Canada. And they're going between their wintering tropical or warmer climates where they can spend the winter, and they go up to the northern areas of temperate forests up to the Arctic Circle, looking for good places for their breeding and for their for nesting, and to be able to have a really rich food supply for raising their young up to the north. These birds do these kind of trips every year of their life. Some of these birds live to be 15, 20 years old. And I always say, if I walked to South America once, that would be the last time I would walk to South America. And yet these little birds, some just weigh a few ounces, are making these incredible voyages. And we unfortunately put obstacles in their way. These majority of the birds that we're dealing with are ones that travel at night. We see larger birds that migrate during the daytime: hawks, geese, cranes that form the formations that we enjoy seeing in the migration periods. But the vast majority of birds are using the cover of night to travel, partly because it's a protected time for them. They're more easily able to avoid predators. It's cooler at night. If you had to run 100 miles, if you had to choose to do it in the heat of the day or do it at night, the winds are less turbulent at night, and they have evolved to use star patterns and magnetic fields and other celestial bodies to navigate and find their way with great precision over enormous distances. And unfortunately, these urban areas that we've built with their patterns of light very closely resemble the stars and the constellations that they're used to navigating with. And they do a lot of their navigation by bouncing light off the back of their eyes, and those angles are things that they're using to orient themselves with. And those things get thrown off. They get confused, they get disoriented when they're in the path of a lot of bright lighting that we put up in our urban areas, especially if there's low cloud cover and the birds aren't really even seeing the stars or the moon above them. They have nothing but the confusing pattern of lights below them. I don't know if most people know, it's gotten more commonly understood that the tribute in lights that's in New York City, which went up for the first time on October 11th, a month after the Twin Towers fell, is an incredible obstacle for birds. That October 11th being the peak of fall migration, thousands of birds died with the tribute in lights. By virtue of the fact that just being beams of light, birds have been tracked to go off course for dozens of miles to come towards this light, which attracts them from huge distances away. And those beams, it looks almost like insects in those beams, but those are just hundreds of birds that get pulled toward the tribute in lights. They still continue to have this. They now do it on September 11th, obviously. The New York City Audubon Society goes there, and if a lot of birds are stuck in the lighting, they turn the lights off in order to let the birds sort of take a break and fly away. But it's still a major waste of their migratory energy to be pulled away from skies that they're trying to fly safely through to come towards this confusing beam of light, where they'll fly until they're exhausted and die. They run into the buildings that are adjoining the light display. And I kind of feel that a tribute for senseless loss of life shouldn't involve more senseless loss of life. So it's something I hope it's someday that they'll find another way to memorialize the 9/11 events. In Chicago, we've always known that the McCormick Place has posed a problem since it was built in the late 70s. And this is a case of lights that are left on in the interior, but facing the lakefront, which is a darkened path that birds are traveling along. They did a study for several years in which they just checked the nights that the lights were left on and the nights that the lights were left off. And they found that there were 83% less bird deaths on any night that the lights were off. And McCormick Place often disingenuously says, we save 83% of the birds by turning our lights off. They save 83% of the birds if they turn their lights out, and then they don't turn their lights out. So they state that it could happen, but they don't add the second part is that they don't turn the lights out. So they're often quoted as being intentionally saving these birds, and they really, up until recently, have not been participating in the light reduction that we're trying to get throughout the Chicago area. And of course, October 5th of last fall was a major mass casualty event in which over 1,000 birds died in one morning at McCormick Place alone. We who monitor the downtown area picked up another 2,000 birds in downtown. So that entire day, more than 3,000 birds that we found died. People ask, what was the situation there? It was a case where in the fall, birds like to travel when the winds are coming from the north because it makes it easier to travel. They don't want to fly into a south wind. Flying into a south wind is extra energy. So around sunset, birds decide if they're going to travel. If the weather conditions are bad, the wind directions are too strong, that they're going to have to fly against, they don't move. And for maybe about a week or more, we had south winds in late September, early October. And all of a sudden on that night of October 4th, the winds shifted to coming from the north, which gives them a literal and figurative tailwind. There was a front that was coming through, and when fronts are moving into our area, birds are often pulled in with that. So a lot of birds that had been built up took off that night. I don't know if anyone witnessed the migration that day. I've seen film of just walls of birds just flying along the lakefront. So many birds were coming through. The cloud cover, as I mentioned earlier, was low, so birds were flying underneath the cloud cover, didn't have an upper altitude to fly away from the bright lights. And they didn't have the stars to navigate with. So they were flying low, they were coming in huge numbers, and that night McCormick Place left its lights on. So the birds were drawn in. I think the 1,000 that died at that building were drawn in, as well as so many more that came further into the downtown area, which produced several thousand more birds. So what's McCormick Place doing about this? It fortunately or unfortunate as the event may be, it did draw the attention of Fish and Wildlife, who we've always talked about the federal Migratory Bird Act, which should essentially be protecting these birds from being indiscriminately killed, because it is a federal crime to kill a protected migratory bird. But in the past, Fish and Wildlife never got involved, in the sense that it was considered unintentional take, that it was just something that the building, if you were to kill a migratory bird with intent, they would prosecute, but it's always felt that they can't apply the law if a building really isn't intending to kill birds. So that incidental take is often something that Fish and Wildlife felt it couldn't respond to. But in cases of anything, like an oil spill is not intended to kill birds. They didn't go out with that boat with the intention of spilling oil and killing birds. But oil companies are held responsible for that kind of environmental damage. And Fish and Wildlife did step in. Many of our groups talked to McCormick Place, or have been talking to them. Generally, McCormick Place kills about 1,000 birds, at least 1,000 birds a year, and it's been doing it for 40 years. So we're talking 40,000 birds have already died at that building, but 1,000 in one morning really got people's attention. And we think that's important, but we want people to understand that that wasn't just a one-time thing and, oh, shoot, that's never going to happen again. It's an ongoing tragedy, and Fish and Wildlife at this point, talk to them about the idea that if they know about this, they have to try to do better. It may not be intended to kill birds, but there's a level of negligence. If you know that there's things that you could do to prevent some of these, don't take those actions. So they gave recommendations to McCormick Place to do something about extinguishing lights or letting less light come out of the building, as well as doing something about the glass. You see those drapes that they have, they're really difficult to use. They're huge drapes. You have to get up on a forklift. You've got to pull it. It takes hours to draw them around what's almost 2 football fields of windows. They have 2 football fields of glass in that building. So I think the McCormick Place never wanted to have to pull those curtains, because it took hours of union labor, which was expensive. And then in the morning, someone had to come and open the drapes up again, because this building was built back in the 70s and they didn't have the modern systems of just pushing a button and dropping a completely light blocking shade. So they're investing in a better system of shading, such that it isn't a big burden to close those drapes. Since October 5th, they have kept their drapes closed through the end of fall migration, and it is spring migration now, and they are drawing the drapes every night until they get a new system. The current drapes they're drawing, but they're getting a new, more efficient shading system that will guarantee that it's easy, because they have to leave their lights on all night. They have a convention during the day, and all the janitorial work and cleanup and setup happens throughout the evening hours, which are the most dangerous for birds that are coming through. So we ask all buildings from 11 p.m. until sunrise to keep as much internal light from going into the outside world, as well as any other external features on a building. So we're hopeful that they've put bids in to put a better shading system in. And they've also ordered window film treatments for some of the glass. I think they may do it in phases. They may not cover all the glass with treatments to make it safer, but they're going to begin to cover critical areas, particularly the east side of the building, which is sort of a first encounter for birds when they're coming off the lakefront. Many of the birds fly over Lake Michigan, and it's the first thing that they encounter when they move off the water is a building like McCormick Place with lights and glass. Regardless of lights or no lights, after birds have been flying all night, they're looking for a place to go and settle in for the day. They want a place where they can rest, a place where they feel safe, a place where there's vegetation and something that they can forage and feed upon. So they enter, if they happen to be right next to the city, They are winding their way into some of the green spaces, the green roofs, the landscaping that exists right downtown following the Chicago River. And they're encountering glass, which is ultimately the enemy of birds. Lighting may attract birds, but what harms or kills them is glass. Glass is a problem because it's transparent and because it's reflective. If a bird wanted to go to that planter with those yellow flowers, the first thing they would do, they would just fly directly there. They don't have a perception that there's an invisible barrier between them and those flowers. You and I would walk around the corner to get to it because we have an understanding of the shape of buildings. We know that there's a frame there. We've experienced glass, but when you think about it, people say, well, why don't birds learn to see glass? Nobody can see glass. We can't see glass, but we are aware of it and we know it's there. Though sometimes the funniest home videos tend to show us otherwise. People walk into glass as well. But we've had that kind of experience that we would know. These birds spend most of their lives up in forests, especially the young birds in the fall. Some of them, I believe, have never even seen a city, and they're coming down into what must be a very foreign environment for them, and with often tragic consequences. And then reflectivity is an even bigger problem because glass can become so mirror-like that it either shows another world of plants and trees that it looks as though a bird could fly towards, or just disappears into the sky. There's a building on, I'm not remembering the name of it. It's on Highland, just off of Butterfield Road, just a little bit south of Butterfield Road, and it has a few parts of the building that are brickwork, but the rest of it are just these sections of glass that become so reflective and show the sky. It looks as though there isn't a building there. It just blends into the sky, and you just see a few little areas where there's brickwork, and the rest of it just on a sunny day looks as though there's nothing there. And that can be so deceptive to birds who just don't understand that that's a false image. I've seen birds fly toward buildings like that have sky reflected in it, hit the surface and pull back and just do it again, because it makes no sense to them that they see something. And it's like if I try to walk over to that doorway and something hit me halfway there, I don't see anything between me and that doorway. I don't have a concept of what's in my way, and these birds don't have that experience. We don't find some of the local birds like pigeons and sparrows very often as collision victims. They have lived their lives next to buildings, and they've bumped into the sides of buildings. They kind of have an experience that some of these neotropical migrants and other birds don't have the time to learn about, because they're only passing through our urban areas and going down to the rainforest or other natural habitat that they spend their winters in, and then back up to breeding grounds. So it's not a question that they can evolve fast enough to build a knowledge or an understanding of the glass materials that we use in both residential and commercial buildings. So our organization was founded in 2003. It was just our 20th anniversary. It was founded by Robbie Hunsinger, who was not an ornithologist. She was a musician who simply saw this problem of birds downtown in spring and fall migration. And I really admire the fact that she didn't just say, well, what are you going to do about it? This is just collateral damage. You got buildings, birds are going to hit them. She really started picking them up, talking to the buildings, talking to them about how important it was to turn lights out, enlisting their help to identify when birds were down and help us to give as many injured birds a second chance and document the scope of the problem that's downtown. And so our group was founded to both work downtown for rescue, recovery, and documentation, as well as trying to educate and make some changes in care. We pick up about 7, I think last year it was 10 to 10,000 birds from last year downtown. And that's in about 1.5 square mile. We pick up that many. About 70% of what we find is dead. And those birds all go to the Field Museum, where they become part of the collection for research study. Every bird is cataloged. Some of them are turned into skins for display. Some of them are turned just into skeletons. They collect tissue samples from every bird, and they keep those tissue samples for future study. There are birds at the Field Museum that were collected 100 years ago, where they didn't have the sophisticated testing that we have today to figure out information about the the bird's health, about the environment's health. And they feel if they keep these birds for posterity, in 100 years, people will be able to look at these birds and understand more, either about the birds, or about the environment they lived in. And they take thousands of birds from us. In 20 years, taking 5,000 or more birds a year, we've given them tens of thousands of birds, and they want all of them. The more they have, the bigger the series of birds they can study. If you only have 3 rose-breasted grosbeaks, you can't draw any conclusions, but if you have 1,000 rose-breasted grosbeaks, you can start making understanding trends, that the females come sooner than the males, or that the males weigh more than the females, and they can have a lot of conclusions drawn. One of those birds is the woodcocks. From a birdwatcher's point of view, when you see a woodcock, it's not very easy to know if it's a male or a female in the field. But the number of woodcocks that we bring them, they're able to determine whether they're male or female. They found that it was usually thought that the males showed up first, and there are quite a few females that show up first in migration. And with that up close handling, they've understood that some of the females already have fertilized eggs, and they're actually showing up in the Chicago area, not to mate, but they've already mated someplace in southern Illinois. And it's a natural history understanding that just from field observations we would have never learned. So even though these birds die, we feel that they're going to contribute to knowledge of their species, and hopefully even maybe find some solutions for them. One of our researchers does studies on bird vision, and the only way to study them is she has to have bird corneas, and they have to be fresh. They can't be frozen. And normally, in order to get 100 corneas from birds to study, you'd have to get a permit just to kill 100 of them to be able to salvage that from them. But by working with us, these birds that have already died, she can be there the day that we recover them, and she could use them, and was able to do a really large vision study. And understanding bird vision is going to hopefully give us a way to understand how to make glass or other features visible for birds if we understand how they're seen. All of our live birds are recovered or injured. They're live, and they were impaired from having hit the window. They come out here to Willowbrook Wildlife Center right down Park Boulevard. We take them about 3,000 birds a year. Willowbrook takes maybe 10,000 animals a year. So 1 out of every 3 things that goes to Willowbrook comes from us at this point, with the hope that the great majority of them, after they've been collected downtown, they often just need a chance to recover. They don't need extensive medical care. They can often be released the same day. But while they're down on the sidewalks of Chicago, they're going to get stepped on, run over by a car, grabbed by predators. We have crows and gulls downtown that have learned to be opportunists and go after the birds after they've been hurt on the ground, and they're too weak to get out of the way. And people say, well, that's just, everybody's got to eat something, and it's kind of circle of life. But gulls should not be eating neotropical migrants. They would normally not. Those little birds would be able to get away from them. But while they're vulnerable and hurt from our buildings, they're easy prey for a lot of predators. So our volunteers, just by giving them a chance to get picked up safely from the sidewalk and given that time to recover and rest, often by the end of the day, many of these little birds who suffer primarily head trauma, they hit glass. They can hit glass at almost 30 miles an hour, and hitting their heads can result in internal bleeding. It can result from brain swelling. Sometimes it's fatal. That's, like I said, 70% of the birds we find die from that extreme head injury. They don't break their necks. They don't break their wings and legs. They sometimes damage their beaks or their eyes, because those are the first things that hit the glass when they fly into it. But a great majority of them that we rescue injured end up getting released and getting a second chance. We banned all the birds that are released, and we have recovered some of the birds that we've rescued and released, which is validating the idea that these birds just don't go off in the woods and die. Some people say, well, you pick them up, at the minute you let them go, they went into the woods and probably just passed away. And we have found birds, that return almost on the same route, and they've unfortunately hit almost close to the same building a year later, which shows the fidelity that these birds have to their migratory route, and how they're not able to learn that they have to change what they do, or that this is a danger for them to travel the way they do. We find almost 200 different kinds of birds. Everything from hummingbird to a bald eagle has hit a window downtown. Most common birds that we find are white-throated sparrows and brown creepers. The most common warbler that we find is an ovenbird. And the thrush that we see the most often is a hermit thrush. We also get gray-cheeked and Swainsons. The two migratory woodpeckers that we encounter downtown, and this is kind of their time of year to travel. We're finding a lot of them are the yellow-bellied sapsucker and the northern flicker. Other woodpeckers stay year-round in our area because they can forage for their preferred meals, but a sapsucker, as his name implies, is drilling holes so that sap runs out. He eats the sap and the insects that get attracted to the sap, and in an area of Chicago where there's freezing temperatures, this kind of bird can't find its food source in the winter. So they're obligated to migrate at least to the southern United States and also the Caribbean and Central America. And flickers eat a lot of ants. And when we have snow cover or cold temperatures, ants kind of go to ground and hibernate, and we don't find ants. So the northern flicker is a bird that's going to be moving south as well to the southern U.S., Caribbean, and Central America, where he can continue to find food throughout the winter. We also get golden crown kinglets in large numbers, and the sparrow we get the most often, well, besides the white-throated sparrow, is the slate-colored junco. Woodcocks are also in our top 10 list. That's my favorite bird. I really love these guys. They're coming through in big numbers. They're one of the first ones that arrived. We were picking them up as early as the beginning of March this year. This is a bird that eats its own weight in worms in one day. The Willowbrook is always thrilled when they have a lot of them. They have to keep going to the bait shops and filling up on worms. These little guys, and I can't imagine eating 100 pounds of food a day, but these guys are really big eaters and kind of need specialized care to induce them to eat in captivity. So they make these really creative little pans with leaves and dirt for them to feed on. We once found this incredible looking American woodcock that had this coloration to it that was, well, actually lack of coloration. I can't imagine seeing something like that in the wild. I'm sorry that it was dead. I think that's a really cool variation of American woodcock. And we actually get babies once in a while. That's a little baby woodcock because we've turned up babies in downtown Chicago. So we think there's places around very urban areas where woodcocks are raising their young. We have some birds that are rare. We've gotten a number of red-headed woodpeckers, which is a species of concern. We get least bittern downtown. What's this bird? Do you know there was going to be a quiz, right? What is it? What do you think? Yes, it is. There you go. You all get to stay in the club. That's good. It's a worm-eating warbler that we found, like it's one of the latest dates in more northern areas for a worm-eating warbler to be found when we picked this little guy up October 24th, 2010. Really nice little guy. Yellow rail are almost a junk bird for us. We find a lot of yellow rail, and to be walking downtown and see a yellow rail just walking down the sidewalk the first yellow rail I ever saw was on a sidewalk in downtown Chicago. It's not much of a natural nature experience, but they too come through the downtown area. So one year we picked up a bird. We were just thinking maybe it was a whippoorwill, and it ended up being a chuck-will's wood downtown. Unfortunately, it was dead. We got a painted bunting one spring, and if you look at their range, their southern Illinois, I guess, is typically as far north as they might come, and this one again was unfortunately dead, but a really unusual find for us. We had this bird preserved as a specimen, and we had it at a informational table at a bird conference, and a man came by and saw the specimen, and he was like so excited because he was from Oklahoma and he was studying the range and the genetics of painted buntings. And he asked us where we got this from and if it was in Chicago. And again, because the Field Museum had saved tissue samples, he was able to go to the Field Museum and get some genetic material to tie it to the populations of painted buntings that he was trying to track throughout the United States. We one season got a call about one of the bridges in downtown Chicago. Someone said there's just like a a dark colored bird laying on the bridge over, I think that may be State Street there, where by this guard tower. And I'm thinking, you know, a dark bird on the ground, is it a starling? And it was in the middle of the day. We sent someone over anyway. It could have been a pigeon. It could have been I was thinking it might be a starling. It ended up being a black rail, of all things, which I myself still haven't seen in the wild. So it's a pretty amazing find. And then again, unfortunately, it was dead. We work with the Lights Out program in Chicago. It's managed between us and along with the Chicago Bird Alliance. This program started in the late 90s as a voluntary effort to ask buildings after 11 p.m. until sunrise to turn on as much of the non-essential outside lighting. So the city doesn't go completely dark, but that skyline you can see is significantly dimmed because the logos aren't lit. Top of the Willis Tower doesn't have its antennas on. The Wedding Cake building has dimmed lights. And in general, when I drove downtown to monitor on Wednesday morning, you see a very darkened outline of the skyline when you come downtown. And we know that act alone is saving a lot of birds and causing a lot of birds to be able to just fly past the city and not get pulled into the dangerous areas where they could get hurt. And as we work downtown, talking to building management and picking up birds, we talk to them about the lights that are pouring out from the inside and whether they can dim or extinguish lighting in lobbies. From 11 p.m. until morning, because a bird that lands into a darkened downtown area that sees attractive fountains and trees inside of a building is going to want to move into what looks like a very inviting world. They want to go toward where there's light, and not understanding that there's glass between them and that tree and them and that fountain that they see inside of a lobby. So we encourage them to use timers, motion sensors. If a lobby just has decorative plants in it and no one's really using it, just have lights on if someone walks through that hallway. Don't have the lights on all night. If there's a guard that has to work in that lobby, give him a station light that lights up the area that he's working in, but don't illuminate the entire lobby and cause unnecessary amount of lighting. And it's amazing how hard it is in other cities to get a lights out program going. We've just been very fortunate that the Building Owners and Managers Association is very supportive of this, and they put the word out to their buildings. We've worked with other cities where they're very resistant to doing any kind of light reduction. It would seem like a win-win because you don't need the lights on at night. It saves energy. There's just a lot of benefits to it, but many cities believe that leaving the city lit up at night makes it look prosperous, makes it look pretty. They think there's a certain appeal to that look, and they want to see those. Often buildings want their logo on because they say it's branding their company. So that light needs to stay on because corporate wants it lit. So it can be very difficult. And I feel we've been fortunate that people here in Chicago have embraced the idea of light reduction. McCormick Place didn't embrace it, which is why we ended up with what happened on October 5th. But in general, people seem to understand and are making a difference with light reduction. For homeowners as well as businesses, again, we talk about things like timers to turn lights out, having motion sensors so that there's only lights when someone's using an area, and certainly having any outside lighting shielded to put the light where you want it. People, we're not asking people to lose the light that they need for safety, but you don't need light that pours up in directions where people aren't. If you focus the light down to where you're going to use it and need it, that's where you want to have the help that you need. And it's actually been found too much lighting can actually be more dangerous for public safety, because if you're facing an incredibly bright light, your eyes contract and you don't see anything that's in the shadows. So you really need to have a more modulated use of light for personal safety. Dark skies are good for people that want to look at stars. Dark skies are good for animal life and for human health. It's been found that people have disruptions in their biorhythms if they don't get a certain amount of darkness every part of a certain portion of every day. We evolved to have darkness when our hormone levels reset themselves, and people that work all night jobs and are never in a period of darkness have been shown to have enhanced cancer rates, and tumor growth increases if you're not getting a daily amount of this. So light reduction is good for all around. Again, it's a win-win. It's saving energy. It can be used for safety, and it can also be used for human health as well as keeping birds safe. We talk about how much glass buildings use and what kind of glass they use. Buildings or companies like Apple really love this all clear cube design, and they replicate it in lots of cities, including in Chicago. Ironically, there's a standard for environmental design called LEED. The LEED stands for Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design, and buildings and architects take pride in having gold, silver, platinum status for their buildings with LEED. But unfortunately, the majority of LEED buildings use a lot of glass. So they kill some of the rated LEED buildings are the biggest bird killers downtown, because ironically, they're using glass so that they don't have to have as much natural light as possible in the building, not having to use as much energy to light up areas. But that large amount of glass, if it's not protected, or if it's not a safe kind of glass for birds, is not going to be beneficial and really isn't environmentally friendly for birds, at least. But you can have a lot of glass and have a really attractive building. We're not telling people that they have to make their buildings all out of bricks and and wood, so that there's no glass. The building in the upper left-hand corner is the Robert Crown Center that was just built in Evanston. All that glass has patterning in it, and there's a lot of light in the building. The building looks very beautiful, but the glass has patterns that birds see and feel that there's no way to pass through that area. Etched glass can be a very attractive thing. The upper right-hand corner is a linkway at an airport that uses frosted or etched glass, and a lot of light still comes in. There's still visibility out, but those patterns give birds the idea that there's a solid surface that they should avoid. The lower left-hand corner is the Buck Stadium in Milwaukee, which was built, as I spoke about the LEED before. You can get your silver, gold, and platinum, but you can also get what they call a innovation credit for bird safety. So the Buck Stadium earned that extra designation as being bird safe. There's a lot of glass in that stadium, but it all has very fine black lines that from a distance and even up close, you barely notice them. But birds with their acute vision and their orientation see those lines, and it allows you to look in and look out. You almost ignore the lines. They don't take away from the appearance of the building at all, but it protects birds. And the building in the lower right-hand corner is the Spiritus Museum in Chicago. It's on Michigan Avenue. That thing is glass from top to bottom, but it's a glass that has a very tiny, tight dot pattern on it, which is why it looks a little bit cloudy, but it lets a lot of light in, but it completely leaves no space that a bird thinks it could fly through. As a matter of fact, this is what the Spiritus Museum has, is this very tight. This is a baked on ceramic frit that is put on the surface of the glass. It stops the glass from being reflective because it's sitting on the outside surface of the glass, and it also just makes it look as though there's no place for a bird to fit through. So there's a lot of creative ways that you can continue to use glass, but make it safer for birds. You can put things in front of glass. You can put, this is the Levy Center in Skokie or Evanston, where there's a lot of glass in that building, but they have a sunscreen that sits in front of it. It helps shade too much light or heat from getting into the building, and it gives something that if a bird flies toward the building, they're going to land on those bars instead of continuing through and hitting the glass. The New York Times building has a series of pipes that come down in front of all the windows that are inside that skyscraper. They did it to make it attractive. They put their logo on it, and it was meant to be something just appealing to look at, but in the end, it creates a barrier in front of glass that's safer for birds. It used to extend all the way to the ground, but people were trying to climb up it, so they had to put it at a level where people couldn't jump on it, and they had people climbing to the top of the tower. So they had to take some of the bottom pipes off of it. And then there's a Bally's Total Fitness that has grill work in front of their windows that again gives you something that's in the way of the glass. You could do this in your own home. I just redid my windows and I put external screens on. So the screen on the outside means I can still look out, but a bird coming toward one of my windows is going to either land on the screen or bounce off of it. It helps me save energy costs because it shades the inside of my house in the summertime, and it's good for retaining heat in the winter. You can hang simple cord systems spaced in a way that gives birds something that, again, is blocking, or it's going to be the first thing they're going to touch before they get to the glass. Those cords hang every 3 to 4 inches. From the inside, it really doesn't ruin your ability to look out your window. They can be moved away, and it's a relatively inexpensive system called Copian Bird Savers that you can either make yourself or buy from this company. I've got some information about them over there. Or just a little do-it-yourself hanging streamers in front of your window. This is a window that was highly reflective, and I had a cardinal that was trying to fly at his reflection. And we just spent all day sitting there flying at his reflection. I put the streamers in front of the window, and at that point he stopped looking beyond to the glass and just saw the streamers and just saw them moving, and they weren't threatening, and he no longer noticed the reflections that were on the surface of the glass, and he stopped attacking the windows, as it were. Temporary banners can go in front of a dangerous area that either advertise a product downtown or are seasonal for a particular occasion. And those can be there until migration is done. So there could be permanent and temporary ways that you can keep birds away from glass. You can put paint on the outside surface of glass. You can do creative art using washable paints, again, in a tight pattern that covers more of the glass and leaves no open spaces. But it's something that's fun. A lot of nature centers and schools do it with their kids. You can leave it up year round, or you can wash it off at the end of a migration season. But what doesn't work is just a single hawk decal. A lot of people want to put one hawk decal in the middle and feel that the birds will just avoid every other part. And a lot of bird stores sell these hawk decals. You'd have to have a hawk decal every 2 inches, which would kind of look ridiculous on a window. This is the building there is the Art Institute, and they face Grant Park. You can see the reflection of the sky and the trees, and it's almost hard to tell, is that really, am I looking at Grant Park, or am I looking at a reflection of Grant Park? And they put these owl silhouettes spaced really far apart. There are plenty of places where a bird is going to hit the glass on a building like that. That's not enough coverage. It's not enough of an alert that there are spaces that a bird can fit through. There's a rule that they call the 2x4 rule that says your average little bird, if you're trying to go from the smallest possible bird that could get hurt, is about the size, about 2 inches like this, and when their wings are spread, they're about 4 inches. And that's normally a space that a bird flying through a forest would be able to navigate between a space. They know they can't fit through anything smaller than that. Some people do 2x2 because a hummingbird is probably better suited to a 2x2 space. And if you space any of the lines, the dots, whatever you do in a 2x2 or a 2x4 pattern, you've essentially made a space that a bird looks at and says, I can't navigate through that space. You can use window films that have patterns that are densely filled in from the outside. This building looks like it's a thicket of trees that a bird would not fit through the openings, but from the inside, it lets a lot of light in, and you're able to look into that building. You can use a simple striping pattern. There's a window film called Solex that has these horizontal bars that from a distance, I've got the photo so you can see the stripes, but you stand back a couple feet, you don't even notice the bars. And you can see that from the inside, you don't even notice that this striping pattern is there. So again, it doesn't ruin your view out. It doesn't ruin the aesthetics of a building. We put this on a building at Northwestern University that was one of the most reflective and most dangerous buildings for birds. We added film, Northwestern added film for the entire building. We almost never find a bird there. We went from one of the most dangerous buildings to one of the safest buildings, and with no impact on the way the building looks or people's ability to use the windows to look in or out. There's another product called Kaleidoscape or bus wrap or multi-perf, which is essentially a static cling piece of vinyl with just thousands of holes in it. And it renders glass, a two-way glass. It is like one of those buses where it looks like Superman on the outside, but from the inside, you can still see out. So if you have that on your windows, plenty of light comes in for your plants, but to a bird or anything on the outside, it looks like a solid wall that they would not approach. This is one of those cute buildings. It's actually, I think, a Bank of America building. This is very similar to what Apple, wants to have, but instead they put this bus wrap film and they silk screen all these images of flowers. From the inside, there's plenty of light. You can look out. From the outside, it looks like 4 very attractive silk screen pattern of flowers. So that's a way to, and it's removable. So if you want to, some buildings downtown put up ads with something silk screened on it, and it serves 2 purposes. It's an advertisement, or it's an attractive decoration, and it makes the glass look solid to the birds. You can put a dot pattern up. There's a product called Feather Friendly that goes on like a roll of tape. You put the roll of tape across and you pull off the tape, and it leaves a little vinyl square every 2 inches. Those dots are spaced again close enough that a bird is not going to try to fly through it. But you can see that from a distance, even when you step a little bit away in that picture, you're not even noticing the dots, and it doesn't in any way upset your view or the visibility of the glass. More of these products or any of them are on our webpage. The American Bird Conservancy rates and shows these products. They do a rating system that goes from 1 to 100. 1 is a brick wall, because you can't ever have 0. You can run into anything, even a brick wall. So 1 is the best you can be, and 100 means a bird hits it 100% of the time. 100 is clear glass or air. So you really want to look for products that rank below 20. To get your best amount of bird protection. So the American Bird Conservancy rates a lot of different products and shows you what level of protection you get. The Kaleidoscape, let's see if we can go back here. Something like this Kaleidoscape, I think ranks as a 10, which means, a bird will hit only 10 out of 100 times, something like this, and maybe potentially even lower. We work with buildings to help retrofit problem areas or identify what they can do. This is the Botanic Gardens in Glencoe. They put up a new building. It wasn't a tall building. A lot of people think that it's just high rises that harm birds. All you have to do is have glass. And this glass was right next to the gardens at the Botanic Garden, and it was reflecting the trees and the sky. And birds were immediately dying the day that building opened. So in the short term, they went out with shading compound, and they painted these dots all over the window. Which made it look kind of ugly, and from the inside, all you saw were these dots. It wasn't very good for visitors to be able to look out the windows. But they had to do that as a short-term fix to keep birds from hitting the glass. But in the future, what they do is they put just grommets up around their windows, and they simply just hang or stretch out screening. Just they either have the screen put on a frame that they hang, or they stretch out just fiberglass screening that again from the inside just looks like there's a shade or tinting on the glass, but you can still look out, and it can come up and down. You don't have to leave it up here during the peak of migration. So a temporary screening can be all you need. This is the Northwestern building where they put that striped film. And as you can see, it's highly reflective, and you have to look really close to see those lines. It doesn't impact any other view. We worked with Northwestern on another building that they built, which is almost like 100% glass. This building, and it's right on the lakefront. They chose a dot pattern, so part of their building, their whole east section that faces the lake, which is what we identified as the most critical area of the building for birds to strike. They added a dot pattern, and we've cut strikes in that area almost in half by having those simple patterns that, again, they're barely noticeable, and they really don't change the look of the building. We worked on an advocacy project when several years ago, Carvana was going to build one of their all glass see-through lit towers, and they were going to put it next to Harm's Woods, which was right by the Chicago River, the Botanic Gardens, and very close to the lakefront where thousands of migratory birds traveled. And this thing was going to be lit up at night, and we wanted them to protect the building by adding some sort of patterning or have the glass have something like this baked onto the glass so that it still would have looked clear from a distance. It would have been fine. No one would have ever noticed it because it was a building that was only going to be seen from a distance, but they really resisted it. They were only willing to do about a third of the building. And this building was a building that from top to bottom was dangerous. But Carvana lost its license to practice in Illinois, and they had to wait to get their license back. And when they did, Skokie had adopted bird-friendly measures and said, now, if you want to apply to build, you're going to have to be 100% bird-friendly. So Carvana is selling their property there. So we ended up not worrying about having something like this built right, I mean, just a parking lot away from a highly protected natural area. We've worked with the planners of the new casino that's going to go up in Chicago. The location that was selected is right on the Chicago River, by Chicago and the river. And all the buildings that are in that area, we find hundreds of birds dead at those buildings. So we know it's an area that birds frequent. We know if they build the casino with a lot of glass, it's going to be deadly to birds. And they've said that they're going to, the glass that they use, they're going to try to make it bird friendly. We hope they follow through on that promise. We've worked with the Obama Foundation on what's going to be built in the middle of Jackson Park, another prime bird habitat that's used right along the lakefront. The main tower of the Obama Center has a lot of glass in the top, but they put that decorative grill around the glass. So that's going to be something that birds can land on, fly around, but not reach the glass that's on the other side. So that's a very creative and I think attractive way to have glass, but have it protected by grill work. Little concern, they're also putting up an athletic center. And if you can see all the glass that's on that, they say they're going to use bird-friendly glass that has patterning in it. I hope they do, because that's a substantial amount of glass to put in the middle of a natural area. It'll be pretty disastrous if they don't protect that glass. We formed a coalition called Bird Friendly Chicago with several other bird clubs in Chicago, the Chicago Bird Alliance and the Chicago Ornithological Society, to say that it's time to have an ordinance that just requires, at first, just new buildings to be bird friendly. It is very hard to fix a building that's already built. It's both expensive, it's hard to, there's no way you can compel a building that complied with ordinances when it was built. You can't say, well, we have new ordinances and now you've got to go back and comply with what's current. But we know that we can at least start new buildings having bird-friendly materials, such that it'll set examples and it will set the pattern of using bird-friendly design. So we wrote a guide for what the critical elements are. We know that the whole building doesn't have to be fixed, but if we can identify the most critical areas, which are usually the first 75 feet, birds spend most of their time not at the top of a building. They spend most of their time on the ground where they're foraging, and they're more likely to hit anything up to tree level because that's where they're coming from, the trees towards the glass. So we made it something that whoever was going to apply this knew how to do it. They knew what they were going to be expected to do. We made a guidebook for the city. We worked with the Department of Planning and Development for them to make these requirements within their new sustainability plan, which is going to be released this year. We knew that we couldn't just tell people be bird friendly. We wanted to make it so that it was achievable, it was understandable, that the people who had to approve someone's permit understood whether someone met those requirements or not. After laying all that out and being told that it was going to be mandatory, we met with them in January. They said, well, they think they're just going to make it optional, that you can earn extra points with it. And extra points is not the same thing as mandating something. That's like saying, you can have a sprinkler system in this building if you want to for some extra points. We believe that if it's important enough that something's going to live or die, or someone's safety is involved in it, you don't make those kind of things optional. You make them required, because it's not just whether more or less stuff gets recycled or more energy is saved. It's a matter of life and death for these birds. And so we are currently working to, they're going to release the sustainability plan this Monday, April 15th. They say that they may not mandate the bird-friendly design standards. We've had a massive write-in campaign to Mayor Johnson, to the Department of Planning and Development, and to the Department of the Environment, saying that bird safety in a city that ranks as the most dangerous city for birds ought to be the city with the most protections for birds. There was a survey that the Department of Planning put out asking people how they rank bird safety. We FOIA'd the results of that survey, and a huge majority of people ranked bird safety as one of the #1 elements that they thought sustainable building ought to include. So they've seen an overwhelming support for this, and they're trying to press upon the idea to make this mandatory. We'll know whether it's optional or mandatory next Monday, and if they do make it mandatory, it will be the first step in, not all buildings will have to do it, but new projects that apply to the city for grants or funding or approvals, that would be major planned developments. It would be anything that's a TIF development. So it'll be the start. We know it's not every building, but it'll set the example of how buildings can be made this way. The major pushback that we seem to hear about why people don't want it, even though like everyone that took the survey said it was important, there wasn't an overwhelming number of people who opposed it, but the city seems to be opposing it. They're saying things like, well, it's going to slow down development because people have to order these special materials. And we know that anybody who makes these special materials, they've told us they can provide those bird-friendly glass in as fast a time frame as traditional glass. So then the next thing the city came back with, well, it's going to cost more. And we don't want to slow down development because it's going to cost more. And again, it doesn't have to cost more. If you use less glass, if you design the glass with elements that put the glass in a position where birds aren't going to strike it, and if you use that bird-friendly glass from the very get-go instead of trying to put it in later, it can be either zero extra cost, or it's been shown that maybe at the most it could be a 10% more on the glass cost. And that 10% cost is less than 1% of the entire budget of an average building. So we're talking tens of thousands of dollars on $1 billion project to go bird friendly instead of with traditional glass. It's kind of a drop in the bucket, and what it would take to use bird friendly glass is than what a typical override happens on a general project. So again, it's an argument that doesn't seem to be valid for how important it is to make these buildings safe. And the other thing is that even though now there aren't as many bird-friendly products, the more people that use it, the more companies are going to start creating these products, and the prices is going to go down. Just like when there weren't very many VCRs, they cost thousands of dollars, and then when everyone had a VCR, all of a sudden you could buy one for $25. So we believe that these products may look a little expensive now, or not have the variety that you have with traditional glass, but a lot of companies are jumping into the market because they see bird-friendly glass as the future, and we'll get more choices and we'll get lower prices the more people use these products. So our organization, what we need volunteers. I've got a sign-up sheet here if anyone thinks they want to help. We not only do work in teams downtown picking up birds, but we maintain a hotline in which we respond to bird collision calls and other urban injuries that birds have throughout the Chicago region. As I said, we take 10,000 calls a year, and it's everything from hawks that have been poisoned to birds hit by car, things tangled fishing line, things that have hit windows, things attacked by cats or dogs. And we need people in almost every area of the Chicago region who can either go out and help rescue, or sometimes just pick something up for someone who can't get it to a wildlife center. So we need drivers, we need people to do rescuing, we need people to join teams. If you find an injured bird, we need you to call us, and there's cards up there on the table. Keep our number. We answer it pretty much 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, and always try to find a way to connect you to a volunteer or give you the help you need to start helping the bird. We are a not-for-profit organization. We're not funded by any organization. All of our work is done through donations from members of the public. And so that is appreciated. If you can't helping us fund all our costs for our phone lines, for our materials, for our transportation needs, it's all been made possible by people who give us generous donations. So that's our webpage. You'll find out that, and on our Facebook page, we've got stories of recent rescues and issues that we're trying to address for helping birds. And that's it. If you have any questions, I can take those now. If you come up later, you can see some of the products and tools that can be used. One of these, I'll show you one of the glasses we have. This is a certain amount of ultraviolet coating. Birds can see an ultraviolet. And something that would just put you through glass. So that's a way to have glass and have it for safe. birds able to recognize them. Straight lines to very clean patterns that you can easily. But birds aren't going to see if they can fit in the process. More creative glasses, I mean, probably available commercial. Can't really get them for your home yet, but that's another thing we want the market to go from. Homeowners to use. Contribution to bird death, not like 100 birds in a home, but if you think everybody's house. That's how you can get. That is.
Annette, anybody have any questions?
I know insects are attracted to certain kinds of light and others don't work. What about birds? Does it make a difference if it's incandescent, LED, fluorescent, neon, whatever?
They found that things that are more in the blues and greens don't attract them as much as the white and the yellow light. So there's something to be said that if you have to use light, if you put it in a spectrum that's more blue and green, it's not quite as attractive. I don't know. The only problem with LED is that it's just simply brighter, and that makes it worse just by the fact that it's so bright. They're not more or less attracted to it, but it just is more intense, and thereby I think more.
So the intensity is more
The coloration can make a difference, but and then yes, the more intense it is, the more it acts as like a beacon to draw them. Yes, that is a factor in the brightness, because if you can dim something, it's not as it doesn't throw off their orientation. It's not completely understood how light confuses birds. It's a little bit like you said, insects that get drawn to a porch and circle endlessly around a porch light or a candle flame. Birds, it's almost the same effect with birds. Yes, back. That's a good question. There weren't monitoring programs before, because Lights Out started in the late 90s, and we started our monitoring program in 2003. And people asked that, what changed? And we only have anecdotal proof that it's better. Back in the days when people left lights on, and of course when McCormick Place did it, there were days when you found 100. There was one night during migration that the Hancock left its top lighted beam on, and they had 1,000 dead birds at the Hancock. We don't, short of what happened at McCormick Place this fall, we never find 100 or 1,000 birds at a time. So we're thinking that that's what's happened. The only way to really test that would be to tell people for a whole year to turn their lights on full blast and compare, and nobody wants to do that. So I think there's some cities that don't have lights out that are monitoring, and maybe there'll be a way to, if they do succeed in getting the light reduction in their city, see what the comparison is. Chicago, as I said, has been pretty fortunate, and we don't want to go back and turn the lights on. But anecdotally, we're pretty sure that we're not seeing these mass casualties, other than McCormick Place's mass casualty. We hope that's never going to happen again too. So it's, hopefully all saving lives with very little effort, no expense. If anything, you're saving money by turning the lights out. So it seems like a simple and an easy fix for starters. Yes.
So what percentage of the bird migrants are released?
About 70% of them. So 70% of them make it back out. Some, sometimes when weathers and winds are more severe, we have a day when none of the birds we brought make it because they all got really severe injuries. But it averages out at the end of the year that around 70% of them do recover. Many of them, like I said, just the same day can be released. And some people say, well, you should keep the birds for a while and feed them and, you know, kind of fatten them up a little bit. But these are wild birds, and when they're kept in captivity, they're under the high amount of stress. They don't like to eat when they're in captivity. So if each bird is taken out when it comes to the center and put into a flight cage to see if it can fly. If it flies twice and collapses to the ground exhausted, it's no good. If it's got an eye injury or some other problem that needs to be treated, they stay. But if they're looking like they're alert, they're not visually impaired, they're flying nicely, the best thing you can often do for them is just let them go in the forest preserves here in DuPage, where they can, you know, choose to rest and refuel for a while before they migrate on, but get them into a natural environment where they don't have stress and you know, where they're free to continue on their migration. That's the other thing, we don't want to release them in the city. Some people say, are they going to get lost because we brought them 20 miles west from downtown? These birds have incredible navigation systems. They made it all the way from a particular beach in Texas, and they're going to a particular tree in Minnesota, and they land there every year. So they don't use Google Maps, and they don't use AAA, and they can be blown off course 100 miles by a storm, and they still make it back to that tree every year. So by bringing them here, we haven't caused them to get lost or not be able to find their way to where they're heading. So that's one thing that some people are concerned about, and they really do manage to make their way where they need to because of this navigation system they have. Annette? Great, thank you very much. It was nice to talk to all of you.
All right, thanks, Annette, again. So with that, that's all I have. If nobody else has any other announcements, we're gonna go ahead and adjourn. And I will see you all next month. Yes.
Just want to say, so it's telling training, say, oh, I'm right. I have a question about volunteer experience. Tell me what it was like to be on the front lines.
It's very rewarding. I mean, whether you're, it's just driving or transporting things seems small, but it's major. If we can't get these birds where they need to go, it's a problem. So we need that help. Everything helps. If you're on a rescue list for Glen Ellen, and once a month there's a call for a robin that needs to get over to Willowbrook, and can you pick it up and move it? If someone has it at their office and they can't get to Willowbrook before Willowbrook closes, even those small things add up to the, as I said, thousands of birds that we pick up. And when you're rescuing these birds, it's a very